Refuge Freedom Stories, brought to you by Refuge Ministries Canada. For the next half hour, your hearts will be filled with hope as you hear real-life stories from individuals that have been changed by the power of God. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to Refuge Freedom Stories. I'm your host, Johnny T. And today my guest is Julie Bonn Blank. Julie's a speaker, a certified abuse advocate and abuse survivor working for Abuse Recovery Ministry Services, and an author who also oversees Cascade Christian Writers Organization. Julie recently had a near-death experience where God took her home to heaven, yet sent her back because he had a specific reason that she couldn't stay. Julie, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I am very glad to be here.
It's exciting to have you here. It seems like just in this last year, I've seen a lot more articles and writings and things about near-death experiences. So I really do want to get into that. What I want to understand first is your journey of faith. And did that near-death experience shape your journey of faith? Or did your journey of faith shape you towards what you experienced when you had that near-death experience?
I think likely the second option is the one that's the most valid for me, although sometimes I would argue it goes both ways. I accepted Christ when I was very young, and my household, my parents, was a Christian household, very strict. I went to church 3 days a week, and I was very involved with all the programming and programs. We went to Awana. They were Awana leaders. We taught good news clubs and 5-day clubs. In fact, we often had good news clubs after school, and we would literally have 20 kids pour off the bus at our house. And we'd all come to our house and sit on the stairs and have a snack and have good news club. So I was super involved from very young, growing up in ministry. However, of course, like a lot of guests, a lot of people you work with and I work with as well, I did have my years where I stepped back from the Lord and I didn't do the best. I didn't make the best choices. I made some pretty rotten choices in those time frames. He's always chased after me to bring me back, and I'm very fortunate. So I came back, obviously, to him and recommitted my life to him a couple times. And when my kids were young, I started taking them back to church. And in turn, that really built my inner faith. And by the time this near-death experience, I had been in ministry full time for several years and doing my best to walk alongside of him, to work alongside of him, very involved in church and all of that. And God recognized that when I went up there. And that was incredibly, incredibly powerful to me because I knew that our work here on earth was important. I knew that, he had given me specific gifts and talents and that I needed to use them for his glory and that I was using them for his glory. But he acknowledged that my work here was important and he acknowledged that there was still a lot left to do. And that was a pretty powerful moment to do that. And it's not just about soul winning. I know we meet a lot of people who come back from meeting with Jesus and, they want to win souls or they start churches, but our ministries aren't all focused around that. Mine in particular is focused around healing and hope. And within that process, are souls won? Absolutely, but that is not primary goal. So what I didn't realize until I went up there was how important my work actually was to him and how much he sees that and how much he values that. And that was a really life-changing experience.
I read through your description of what had happened. You had a severe allergic reaction and you were stumbling around to try and get the right medications from your purse and things like that. All the while you're going in and out of consciousness, I guess, and so on. And God granted you favor, though, with your medical team that was dealing with you and giving you the clarity to tell them exactly what you needed because you'd been through something like this before. And the favor with them to recognize, rather than trying all of their set things, to recognize that, hey, this lady really kind of knows what she's talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was told later in the hospital, my senior doctor came in and said, with your history, it's good that you know what you needed. You knew what you needed. And all I could say was, thank you for listening, because I had been to that hospital a couple of months before with a similar allergic reaction, and I had a different experience with the doctors. I don't know if that was in my chart or what, but he came by to reassure me. He said, you do know what you're talking about. Make sure you're clear with us what you're talking about because you knew exactly what you needed. What I really want to say is I didn't. It was God. It was God that walked me through the whole thing and told me to treat it like a reaction. But I still was not fully cognizant at that time. So God was in that. And God was actually in it from the very beginning. It wasn't just the near-death experience itself. It was, leading up to it. He was speaking to me loudly And I was alone in the house, and he was telling me, this is a reaction, treat it as a reaction. And I didn't think it was. It was like any reaction that I had had before. These were not the same symptoms that I normally have when I'm reacting. And sometimes I have hives or I have rashes or breathing problems, and I can tell I'm allergic to something when it happens. But this time I could not. But I kept passing out. I couldn't stay awake, and I was really, really sick. So God literally told me, he said, treat this as an allergic reaction. And I was like, huh? And I heard that and I said, okay, he means for me to go take my oral meds that I have for allergies. And so I did. I went and found all of them. And I went back to the couch, and then it came very, very loud. This was all in my head. His voice was in my head, but it was still louder. And he said, Julie, he said, treat this as an allergic reaction. And I said, oh, he means my EpiPen. And so I went back to the kitchen. I'm stumbling at this point. I'm out of it. And I dug through my purse and found my EpiPen. I'd never used it before. I have one just in case, but I've always made it to the ER in time. So I've never had to actually shoot myself up with my EpiPen, but I managed to do that right through my jeans and my thigh, and things got a little bit better. And the other thing he spoke to me very clearly about was every time I felt like I was going to pass out, I would want to lay down, and I would start to lay down. And he said, do not go to sleep. Don't lay down, don't go to sleep. And I was like, okay. And I would sit up and blink and try to stay awake. So even before the actual, event of going to heaven, he was walking me through it. And it's a good thing he did, because I was home alone by myself and I was shaking so bad. My hands, I couldn't even call or text anybody. I couldn't even walk out of the house to get help. But he was there in that time, and I knew who was there with me.
Yeah, I think it's so important whenever we're going through something like that. The listeners need to really understand that God does want to speak to them, and God does want to interact with them in a way that they can understand, because God speaks to us all differently, and in a way that they can understand that, hey, this is something outside of myself. You get that gut feeling sometimes, or people talk about that, or a prompting, or whatever it might be. And it's really important that people understand that God is trying to interact with them, especially if they don't know God, especially if they've never given their heart to the Lord, because they can be walking into a situation or an event or something where God knows what's going to happen there, and he's trying to protect them.
Yes, and he really does meet us where we're at. I have a friend on Facebook who meets with houseless people, and then she writes about those experiences. And what I've always found interesting is that God really shows her the way to their heart, whoever it is. And it's different with every single person. One woman, she'll know that she needs to talk. She told the story of a woman who needed a pair of shoes, and my friend had a pair in her trunk, and she went and got them, and they were the perfect size for this woman. Some people just listen to him. And she, of course, always ends up with a scripture and prayer and encouraging them, points them to the Lord. One guy came up to her recently and said, you're the writer who wrote about my brother who just died. And he just lost it and he needed to breathe. And she hugged him and encouraged him to just breathe well. And he hugged her and he cried for a long time. And that was the goal, that she was there for him and that Jesus was in her, meeting each person exactly where they needed to be at each time, which is pretty amazing. So she is a great listener to the Father.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, talking about meeting Jesus, when you went to heaven, I read your description about a moving mosaic of gems and things like that. And maybe you can describe that and talk about that. But then also, you recognized that Jesus was standing near you, and the trepidation that you had about turning around to talk to him. Maybe you can go through that a little bit.
So I had been blacking out, as we talked about quite a bit, and the experience was the same each and every time. It was a true fade to black. I've never understood that phrase before, but I do now. It was grayish and black, and it kind of went to kind of a roar, and then there was nothing, and this kept happening. And I got to the ambulance, and they had me strapped down, laying down. So I finally felt safe to close my eyes and go. And of course, they were trying very hard to keep me awake. And so they kept asking me questions, Mrs. Blank, what do you do? Where do you live? Who's the president? What's the year? All these things, trying to keep me up, and they would shake my shoulder. I passed out a couple times. Then came the question, what do you do? What do you do for work? And I was telling them, I said, I'm a writer, and I also work for a Christian nonprofit, and I work with survivors of domestic violence. And they said, boy, that's not stressful, is it? And as soon as that conversation finished, I passed out again, but it wasn't black anymore. It was orange this time. It was orange and jeweled, kaleidoscope, like those kaleidoscopes that you look for when you're a kid. And it was orange first. Sorry, it was kind of an orange cloud, and I saw people behind it. And I'm a curious person by nature, very much so. God made me that way. And I stepped forward. I was never afraid of dying per se, maybe of the process a little bit, but I always knew where I'm going. But of course, we all get nervous about the process. And literally, I just want people to know that I closed my eyes and I opened them, and it was that smooth. I did not tunnel up as some people do. But when I opened my eyes, there was this orangey cloud in front of me and there was movement behind it. There were people and shapes, and I was like, huh, those are people. And immediately I'm like, where am I? What is this? What is this? And then it dawned on me where I was. It wasn't black anymore. And I kind of leaned forward. And at that point, I felt him next to me. He was on my right hand side. I was not able to turn and look. It's very much like when you're in a dream and you're frozen, like there's a snake in front of you or something, and you try to lift your foot and walk over the snake and you can't. You feel frozen and you can't. That's exactly what it was like. But I felt him next to me. It's just like, when you're walking in the mall, right? Or the airport, and somebody comes and stands right next to you and you feel their presence. That's what it felt like. But it was kind of like being in a dream where I could not move. And so then I realized that I'm not supposed to see him yet. And I'm not supposed to see into that cloud yet. So it's just a cloud. I don't see buildings. I don't see gold pavement. And so he snapped these two panels in front of me so that I couldn't see into the cloud anymore. And there they were. And that's where the kaleidoscope comes in. It's very hard to explain. I tried to draw them when I got back, but I'm not an artist. I recently had a wind catcher thing made of my kaleidoscope pattern because it was just amazing. And the two panels were glass, but I believe they were jewels. And they had pearls intermixed, and they had black onyx intermixed on the edges. And they were moving. They were literally, living. They were breathing panels, gates. There was constant movement. I remember thinking, two things. I thought of my dad. My dad creates mosaic art. I thought of that. And I remember trying to look for flowers within the pattern because my husband and I had an upcoming trip to Oahu. We were going for our anniversary. And so there was a lot of orange, a lot of light shining through it, but there's also some pink and some lavender and some gold. And, again, the pearls were embedded in the corners and black dot that I believe are black onyx. So it was alive and it was moving, it was breathing, and it was right in front of me, and it was wavy, and I was fascinated, and I was like, oh, there's a flower and there's this, and I just couldn't stop staring at it. I was like wide-eyed, just like that kaleidoscope toy, when you were a kid. It was all these cool colors and it was beautiful. It was absolutely beautiful. And then I realized, oh, so I'm not supposed to see in that gold cloud yet. Whatever's going to happen here, I'm not supposed to go there yet. And then sure enough, he spoke. And that's when he talked to me. It was very fast. I don't think I was gone for long, but he said, go. There's still so much work to be done. And of course, this was just after I'd been telling the EMTs what I do for a living and what I do in my spare time. But as soon as he said go, I was tunneling backwards. It was literally like a vacuum vortex in the movies where someone moves really fast and it kind of sucks. Everything sucks right in front of them. But he was holding me, or he sent an angel. Somebody was holding me on the way down. But it was so fast that as soon as he said go, I went. And literally, as I opened my eyes in the ambulance, I was still hearing so much work to be done. And of course, my immediate thought was like, yes, yes, Lord. And so it was that fast. It was literally 3 or 4 seconds that I was back. And when I opened my eyes, they were shooting more epi into me. And the EMT was telling his driver to get a move on to the hospital because they'd been trying to stabilize me. And apparently I flatlined. So it was an incredible experience. So, of course, I was very focused on getting better. But as soon as I got to the hospital and they were able to stabilize me, I couldn't shut up about it. I was telling everybody all about the orange and the gate, and he was there, and I was just blah, 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 blah. And there was a nurse, and I'm like, okay, I'm supposed to speak to more people. And the nurse is entering my data into the computer. And I don't remember what the verse was. I quoted a Bible verse at him, and I got it backwards. And then I said, actually, that's not right. I said, the correct way is this. And he laughed and slapped the keyboard. And he said, you're right. You're sure right. That's how it is. And I thought, okay, he's not the one I'm supposed to witness to. He already knows the Lord. Right. But I would continue to keep figuring out, who I was supposed to talk to. My husband finally came in at that point, and I was still elated, bouncing off the walls. I mean, as much as I could be from a hospital bed. It was the absolute joy of being in heaven and the inability to talk about or focus or concentrate on anything else except that, for what he showed me and the value he put in me and the love he felt for me and the love that each one of us will someday feel when we face him, because we are the only person in the room with him when we are there with him. And that's how he sees it as well. And that's how it's going to be for each one of us someday. I always thought, God was probably a very busy person and has a to-do list and is busy being the CEO of heaven and running angel angels around and making assignments and things like that. Oh, and meeting other people at the gate, right? But that is not how it was. Not only was he sad to not have me staying, because he was, but I had his undivided attention. It was just me and him. And that is how it's going to be, which is amazing.
So clearly, that would have transformed your view of your purpose and his plans for you. How has that changed how you share the gospel with people?
Yes, there's a little more urgency to it as far as sharing the gospel, but not as much as I expected. I would like to present a little different view here because I've read many experiences now. After I got back, I immediately wrote my experience down because I didn't want it tainted and I wanted to remember it. People kind of laugh at that who have had near-death experiences because they're like, you always remember it. But I just wanted to make sure and remember it. But I did start researching and reading. I'm reading Randy Alcorn's Heaven book and I'm still working through that. I'm taking a Bible study on Revelation and reading a lot of other Christian near-death experiences and meeting with people. And on that note, I have started an anthology book, a compilation book of near-death Christian experiences. So I would love if somebody's listening to this that has had an experience and would like it in a book, get a hold of me. Let's talk about it. So you do hear and you get that impression a lot that people come back to save lives. And this is, and I know I mentioned this before, sometimes they'll even go in the mission field or do what they need to do. But here you're talking about a gal who's already in ministry times three, basically three ministries. And that message was not imparted to me. It was not told me, do I witness to people? Absolutely. Do I lead people to Christ within my ministry as that opportunity arises? Absolutely. I will do that. But I pray as a part of ministry. And again, I work on the healing and the hope. But I don't feel that intense call to go out and win souls. What I feel that intense call to do is to go out and provide that healing and hope because that leads to the Lord. And I do literally feel like the major block in this world from people finding the Lord is hurts, is their past hurt and their trauma. And they've had it in childhood or adulthood and sometimes even their church. Their church has wounded them very, very much. And unfortunately, our own churches sometimes do that because they're still getting educated on things like that. And so the majority of people that I connect with, there's a reason they have not turned to the Lord, and it's based on that hurt and on that pain. And if we can work on that hurt and that healing, knowing that God is the source overall of all of that, that they will naturally turn to their Heavenly Father who loves them with such a depth and a width. And that's what I pray over them, as well. So I'm not out there in the street corner saying, come to the Lord. Do you want to go to heaven someday? But I am helping to work on the inner person. And that's where I feel he wants me to be involved.
Yeah. And it was interesting when you said that when you came back to the ambulance and yet the presence of God was still very much with you, that close and that intimate, even though your location had changed from heaven back to earth, that intimacy with God was still so clear.
I had no idea how. And you do hear that phrase. You hear that there's a thin veil between heaven and earth. And now I get it. Now I understand that. Such a thin veil, truly. We can go over it in an instant and be back. And sometimes he does that. And sometimes he does tell us, it's not your time. And we can keep doing the work and we need to keep doing the work. And there's still very much work to be done. He told me there's so much work to be done. I can't do all that work by myself. And it's a very thin veil. And I guess what I wish most for my unsaved family and friends is that they could understand the very thin veil and that God is right there, not just on the other side of the veil, but all around us and with us and in us and through us. And as soon as they call his name, he will be there. He will. I've read so many experiences of people who were even atheist or agnostic, or they weren't walking with the Lord, or maybe they had never walked with the Lord. And yet they went to heaven because as they were dying, they said, forgive me, Lord, or I hear you, Lord, or God save me. And they called out to him. And that is what he says, right? That he answers. Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ and you will be saved. He doesn't walk us through a sinner's prayer. I understand that there's good things with the sinner's prayer and there's good reasons for it. And it's what I did years ago and what I walked other people through. But there's no sinner's prayer in the Bible. And there have been people that have been at death's door and have called out to him. And as a result, they do go to heaven and some come back instead of hell. So there's a very thin veil. And the nice part about it is that he's always there, right? And every day he is there in an instant for you to say, no matter what's going on, no matter what hurt you've had, whether it's been abuse or substance abuse or disability or hurt people or trauma in your life, no matter whatever sin that you've had, all those things are forgivable. You can just reach out to him and he's right there to wash that slate clean and to welcome you and to start over again.
Yeah, absolutely. So, how have people reacted to your story about that? And I'm going to paraphrase something that I heard. And basically, it says, a man with a experience holds a man with a theory at his mercy.
I still hear the stories. The majority of people were very understanding because they loved me and I wasn't ready to yet shout it to everybody. I did eventually, of course, but there are people who look at you like, okay, what really happened when you went unconscious and went to heaven? Because now you need to go to the loony bin, you know? There's just some people that don't believe. So the majority of people were helpful, but there's definitely that class of people who look at you like you're nuts, you know, at this point, and it's okay. I know I'm not. I know where I was at. I know where he was. And I'm like, okay, you know, that's going to happen. There's going to be people that either are offended or feel I shouldn't be talking about it, that it's a private matter. But that is not what God, you know, that's not what he indicated to me. So, you know, it's hard with a near death experience. There's been quite the recovery process. I'm still keeping a recovery journal, and the stats actually say it takes 7 years for somebody to recover from a near death experience. And at first, I kind of scoffed at that. I'm not really scoffing anymore because I am still processing and I am still learning. So that's the encouraging thing about it. We all need that hope. We need that hope of eternity. And to remember that hope in the Bible doesn't mean floaty hope. It means confident expectation. So when God tells us, you know, to have hope, he is saying literally in those Bible verses to have confident expectations. And I have a responsibility to share what I experienced. Because you mentioned in the beginning how you were hearing about more experiences and more near-death experiences. And I think there's two reasons for that. I think one is that we've become more accepting of it now in our society. If you read some of those books, like there's been a couple written in the 1800, a very famous one actually by Rebecca Springer, and it's an incredible story of a lot of time spent in heaven. And back then, you know, it was presented as a vision. And I just finished John Bunyan's as well. It's called Visions of Heaven and Hell. But then I looked it up. Turns out, yep, he had a near-death experience, but they couldn't present it that way. And so one of the reasons is that we've become more accepting of it, and so people can talk about it more. But research also shows us that near-death experiences have actually increased. So there's a lot of people out there who have had one, but they just aren't talking about it. And, you know, potentially it may be a sign of the last days. More and more people are experiencing bits and pieces and coming back to help spread the word. You know, heavenly missionaries, right? And maybe that's part of God's purpose too, is to bring hope to the world.
So really quickly, tell me about Recovery Ministry and also about Cascade Christian Writers Association.
Yeah, sure. I appreciate that. Yes, my day job is for ARMS. It's called Abuse Recovery Ministry and Services. And their program did save my life 12, 13, and 14 years ago when I was in domestic abuse. I had been in several relationships that were abusive, and I found this program through my church. I had to go through probably 3 cycles of the Her Journey program. Came on staff 6 years ago as their women's ministry and educational director. So it's a full circle moment that I've been able to come back to a program that saved my life. And it is an amazing program. And then another ministry that I'm involved with is Cascade Christian Writers. It used to be Oregon Christian Writers. It's been around for 60 years, and I am the current president of the board of that organization. We hold 3 conferences a year for writers to meet with publishers and agents and work on their stuff. And for members, we have monthly educational Zooms. So, and then we also host the Cascade Awards, which are pretty well known in the Christian industry.
Cool. Okay, one final question for you. What's the one thing you would tell people about God?
Well, I hate to sound like everybody else because what I've read is basically about the same. And it's that the love of God is so amazing. I mean, you have no idea. You don't have anybody in your life who could possibly love you as much as he loves you, whether you're walking with him or not. He knows you uniquely. He knows you individually. And I knew that I was standing there with him, that he knew me inside and out, and that he accepted me and he loved me. And I still have work to do. And I think that if more people could get an idea of that immense love that he has for them, no matter what they've been through, no matter what they've thought of him, no matter what they've done, no matter what they've said, that they would come to him with open arms. So it's basically the intense love that I experienced while I was there. And since I've come back, he continues to teach me and to download things. We call it kind of a download. We end the ears. And he continues to speak to me, to walk with me, The first week back, he was in the house with me. I literally felt him next to me as I was walking around my house and around the room. And I think that he knew I needed that as far as recovery, and that he knew that I would miss him when I came back. But yes, his intense love is what I would like everybody to truly understand and experience.
Amen. Can't argue with that. So where can people reach out to you in other ways?
My email is just my name, juliebonblank@gmail.com. And Bonn has 2 N's in it.
Well, thanks so much for being on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you and hearing about your experience, that intimate experience with the Lord. So God bless you.
You as well. Thank you, Johnny.
Little girl gonna wish upon a star, sidewalk chalk in her hand and a dream in her heart. She has a whole world full of love to pursue. She's reaching out to heaven, heaven's reaching out to you. Reaching out to heaven, heaven's reaching out to you. 10 years ago his joy none could devour, but with the weight of the world now his heart's gone south. He's given all he can, but still more is due. Gotta reach out to heaven, heaven's reaching out to you. I know you think you're running out of time. Turn around and see what you left behind. Back around the time you kissed your innocence goodbye. You know there's a road that you can take to make the wrong turns right. So reach out to heaven. Heaven's reaching out to you. Now for cover, they don't know what to feel, speak, think of each other. Vows of love close to crumbling through. Gotta reach out to heaven, heaven's reaching out to you. I know you think you're running out of time. Turn around and see what you left behind. Back goodbye. You know there's a road that you can take to make the wrong turns right. So reach out to heaven's reaching out to you.
I hope that you have enjoyed the last half hour as much as I did. Thank you again to Refuge Ministries Canada for hosting the show. So until next Friday, may God richly bless you with peace, love, and happiness.
We at Refuge Ministries are so blessed by the success of Refuge Freedom Stories and podcasts. In addition, we focus on youth prison ministry, release kits, and many other diverse outreaches to the needs of our community. As a nonprofit, there are many costs involved, however, and we are asking for your support. Financial gifts can be made via our website at www.refugeministriescanada.com or by calling 519-701-0108. Your giving makes this work possible, and we thank you in advance for your support. That's 519-701-0108. God bless you.